Situated a mere 6 kilometers from the center of the city of Durban and facing onto the river after which it is named is the Umgeni River Bird Park. Here on what was once a disused quarry site, an urban scar has been transformed into one of the city's biggest attractions. Over what was once stark rock face, waterfalls now cascade. Ground that had been denuded of plant life now nourishes lush tropical foliage. And instead of the once deafening noise of machinery, the air is filled with birdsong. For this same area of land is now a beautiful and safe haven for hundreds of birds, thanks to veterinarian Dr. Alan Avery, whose brainchild it was. Many of the birds are indigenous to Africa, and equally as many of them have been imported here from different countries all over the world. They are small birds and big birds, serious birds and comical birds, inquisitive birds and timid birds, birds with exquisite plumage, and some that are comparatively dull. There are birds that you have probably never seen in your life before, and many that will fascinate you. In fact, to step inside the Umgeni River Bird Park is to lose yourself in a bird paradise. Now, although just looking at birds is a pleasure in itself, there is a way of making your visit to the bird park a more meaningful experience. And that is by getting to know something about the birds that you're going to see. Perhaps the first thing you need to know is that scientists have divided birds into different groups according to certain physical characteristics that they have in common. Beak shape, for example, is a very telling characteristic of birds because it reveals not only the kind of diet a bird prefers, but often also the type of habitat it favors. The same can be said about a bird's feet. In this park, 11 of the 27 main groups of birds found in the world are represented. Each of these main groups is called an order, and each order has a Latin name. Because there are so many different species of birds in each of the orders have been further subdivided into families. For example, all the perching birds have been grouped together in an order known as Passeriformes. They were grouped this way because their feet are similar. They have 4 unwebbed toes which are joined at the same level, 3 toes facing forward and 1 behind. Now, because there are literally thousands of different species of perching birds, scientists divided them up again into families. For example, they put all the different species of weaver birds together in the same family. They put all the sunbirds together in another family, and so on. Let us meet some of the birds that belong to the 11 groups or orders of birds that have happily settled here at the Umgeni River Bird Park. We're going to see how each group has been placed in an environment that resembles its natural habitat as closely as possible. We're going to take special notice of beak shape and the way it relates to a bird's diet. We're going to look at the way a bird's feet have adapted to its lifestyle. And we're going to learn, very briefly, about nesting habits. Perching birds make up the biggest order of all, and one of the families within this order is the family of Australian finches, which represent the seed-eating perching birds. From the way these beautiful little birds are tucking into grass seed, it's obvious what kind of food they like. But notice their short, stout, conical beaks, which are the ideal shape for cracking and dehusking seed. Seed, however, is not their exclusive diet because Australian finches are also partial to insects, particularly termites. Foot shape is the other thing to look at. See how the delicate feet have 3 toes in front and 1 behind, an arrangement that helps them not only to perch, but also to grip onto even the most slender of grasses. And you may be lucky to spot one or two nests in the Australian finch aviary. Notice that they're made of grass and are dome-shaped. Often finches build them very close to the ground. The next order of birds we're going to meet is the parrot order, or Psittaciformes. All parrot species are collectively referred to as psittacines, and among them we have macaws, cockatoos, lories, lorikeets, budgies, cockatiels, and lovebirds. Beak shape is perhaps the most outstanding characteristic of all these birds, being strongly down-curved and hooked. A parrot's beak is also amazingly strong, as is evident from the way these birds are able to crack even the hardest nuts with ease. They also use their beaks for climbing and clambering, and even to gnaw hollows into logs so that they can nest there. Foot shape is another interesting characteristic of the parrot order. Unlike the perching bird's foot arrangement, notice how two of the parrot's four toes face forwards and two behind. This gives the bird a powerful grasp. A parrot also has the unique ability of using its feet like hands. Apart from lories and lorikeets, its diet consists mainly of fruit, seed, grain, and nuts. The kings of the parrot order are the gaudy macaws, which hail from the tropical rainforests of southern Mexico and Central and South America. An easy way of distinguishing them from other parrot species is that they have very long, graduated tails. This macaw is known as the scarlet macaw because of the bright red amongst its yellow and blue plumage. This is the gold and blue macaw. And these magnificent hyacinth macaws, with their unusual coloring and comical faces, come from the vast jungles of Brazil, the only place in the world where they're found in the wild. Cockatoos are another family of parrots, and are easily distinguished because they have a crest of long pointed feathers on their heads. Most cockatoos are white birds, tinged with either pink or yellow. A notable exception, however, is the palm cockatoo, which also happens to be the largest of all cockatoos. It has a particularly striking crest of long, silky feathers on its head. But also remarkable is its very large curved bill, which ends in a long, sharp point. Small by comparison are members of another family of parrots, the lories and lorikeets, which are usually brilliantly colored and very active birds. These birds come from several of the Southeast Asian countries, and what sets them apart, and in a group of their own, is that they are nectar and pollen-eating birds. Normally one thinks of nectar-eating birds as having long tube-like beaks like these, which are the ideal shape for siphoning nectar out of flowers. But the way lories and lorikeets get to the nectar is by crushing the flowers, and then by using their long tongues with brush-like tips to lap up the sweet juice. Because in captivity it is difficult to feed these birds on nectar-laden flowers, they're given a nectar substitute made out of syrup, raw egg yolk, pronutro, and vitamins. In fact, feeding in general is a highly specialized business at the bird park, and a lot of care is taken to ensure that the birds are given a correct and balanced diet. Feeding birds on the wrong type of food can make them very ill, and this is the reason why you are asked not to feed them. And speaking of illness, you might like to know that the birds receive excellent medical attention. After all, what more could one wish for than a resident vet? Also, whether the birds are sick or not, they're given lots of tender, loving care. For at this park, a whole family of bird lovers is involved, and their passion for birds would be hard to rival anywhere. Psittaciformes is another large order of birds in which we find families which appear to be most unalike. For example, kingfishers, rollers, hoopoes, And hornbills all belong here. The reason, believe it or not, being that their 3 front toes are joined for part of their length. Hornbills are probably one of the most fascinating families of birds. Not because of their feet, because most of us don't notice those, but because of their enormous beaks, which are usually topped by a grotesque horny casque. Some of you may recognize this yellow-billed hornbill, because this particular species is a fairly common sight in the South African thornveld. But these enormous birds have come all the way from Asia. They're 2 of the largest species of hornbill in the world. This species is known as the great hornbill. Closely resembling it is the rhinoceros hornbill. Now, what may interest you is that although a hornbill's bill looks heavy and unwieldy, it is actually very light, and the bird is able to use it most deftly. Not only does it use it to push aside dense foliage as it seeks out its diet of fruit, insects, small reptiles, rodents, and even little birds, but it can even grasp small things by using just the tip of its beak. And another interesting thing is that in order to swallow, a hornbill has to first throw its food into the air and then open its beak wide so that the food lands at the back of its throat. This hornbill was very happy to give you a demonstration of the way it's done. Hornbills have a very unusual breeding behavior in that the female is sealed inside the nest, usually a hollow in a tree, throughout the time that she incubates her eggs, and even until her chicks are about 6 weeks old. Only a small slit is left in the sealed entrance, and it is through this that she is fed by the male. When she eventually emerges, fat and stiff from her confinement, both she and the male take it in turns to feed their hungry babies. Now there is another family of birds that some people mistakenly think are hornbills because they too have large beaks, and these are the toucans. Toucans, however, are not related to hornbills, even though many of their characteristics and their food preferences are similar. They belong to the order Pisciformes, a distinguishing characteristic of which is the arrangement of the thigh muscles and the tendons that move the feet, which, as you can see, are similar to the parrots. But for ordinary people like ourselves, who know little about a bird's anatomy, the most obvious difference between toucans and hornbills is that a toucan's beak doesn't have a casque. It is also brightly colored and often even patterned, so much so that some toucans' beaks look as if someone's had fun trying out a new box of peds. Toucans are found wild only in Central and South American tropical forests. So far, many of the birds we've seen are kept in cages or aviaries in the bird park. But proof of how content they are is obvious, not only because they look so well, but because many of them have paired off and are producing young. One is hardly aware that, by contrast, there are several other species of birds that are free to roam around the park. Yet, the interesting thing is that like birds tend to keep together and to confine themselves to a particular type of habitat. Ducks, geese and swans, which collectively are known as waterfowl, order Anseriformes, cannot resist water, and that's where you're most likely to find them. It's because of their aquatic lifestyle that they have evolved certain interesting adaptations. Their beaks, for instance, are broad and flat, and are lined with special little hairs or lamellae, which enable them to filter food organisms out of the water. And because their toes are webbed, they make excellent paddles and help the birds to glide effortlessly and gracefully through the water. Could any bird look more magnificent than this swan? Waterfowl usually make simple hollow nests on the ground, sometimes quite far from water. But some species, such as swans, make quite large grass mounds. This swan is patiently incubating her eggs. This one is already the proud mother of all these delightful little cygnets. Waterfowl, especially ducks, are rather common birds, particularly when there are inviting stretches of water for the taking. But another order of birds whose very existence is threatened is the order Gruiformes, in which we find the different species of cranes. These birds are becoming increasingly rare because there's been such widespread destruction of wetlands, which is the type of habitat that they favor. In fact, the wattled crane is actually now regarded as an endangered species. What a tragedy it would be if these magnificent birds were to disappear altogether. They are one of the very oldest species of birds in the world, some crane fossils having been found from the Eocene age 40 million years ago. Cranes, as you see, are large, long-legged birds with comparatively long necks and long, strong, pointed beaks, which are useful for digging in search of food. Frogs, insects, and reptiles are their staple diet, but they also eat grain, seeds, and other vegetable matter. Their long, strong legs enable them to walk long distances in search of food, particularly in wetlands and through long grass. In South Africa, we have 3 species of crane: the beautiful crowned crane, the wattled crane, which is desperately in need of protection, and the blue crane, which is South Africa's national bird. A constant reminder of this is that it is depicted on our tiny 5-cent coin. Crowned cranes and wattled cranes nest on large mounds of plant material in marshes. Blue cranes make shallow scrape nests in open grassland. Moving on to a different order of birds that are found in the park, we have the wading birds, or Cichoniiformes, which generally have adapted to a life in marshes or shallow waters, though there are a few that have become accustomed to living on dry uplands. In this order we find such families as storks, ibises, spoonbills, and flamingos. All are long-legged, long-necked, long-billed birds, and they also have 4 long spreading toes which help them to walk easily through mud. In the case of flamingos, the 3 front toes are fully webbed, which enables them to swim perfectly well in deep water. Diet is another thing these 4 families have in common. They all live on animal food, most of it aquatic, like fishes, crustaceans, amphibians, and also insects and reptiles. They're also strong flyers, certain species like the stork being migratory and returning to Eurasia every year to breed. Flamingos are, without doubt, the most beautiful birds within this order. But it is really the flamingo's bill and its method of feeding that makes it unique. Notice how the bill is bent in the middle and that the lower mandible is much larger than the upper one. These mandibles are edged with hundreds of tiny hairs called lamellae, which fit closely together when the flamingo's bill is shut. Whilst the bird has its bill in the water, it is pulling back its big tongue and sucking water in through its closed beak. Then it's pushing its tongue forward, squeezing out the water again, and all the tiny particles of food that are in the water are being caught by the little hairs. Hooks on the surface of the tongue are then scraping off the food which the bird is swallowing. Let us now look at the way the other families within this order eat. As you can see, the ibis uses its long curved beak for probing. The spoonbill, on the other hand, sweeps its strange-shaped beak from side to side, whilst the stork's long, sharp, pointed beak is the perfect shape for digging and stabbing. With regard to their nesting habits, flamingos like to live and nest in large colonies. Their nests are usually just a mud mound with a shallow depression, and they incubate only 1 egg at a time. Ibis's nests vary from one species to another, but they usually consist of a platform of sticks. Spoonbills make flimsy platforms on partially submerged trees or reeds over water, and storks build a large platform of sticks and grass, either in trees or on the roofs of buildings. Coming right down to earth again, We have an order of fowl-like birds which spend most of their lives on the ground. Order Galliformes, or, as it is sometimes known, the order of ground birds. In this order we find several families, among which are pheasants and guinea fowl. What characterizes these birds are their strong legs and feet, which enable them to walk long distances, and their short, strong, slightly curved beaks, which they use to dig in the soil and around rotting vegetation for their food. This includes seeds, roots, buds, fruit, and succulent grass, supplemented by a variety of insects, termites, worms, and snails. Their nests are usually simple hollows, with or without nesting material, and usually well hidden in between clumps of grass. There are two other orders of birds which are also very much ground living, and which, in certain respects, resemble each other, though they're not related. The first of these is order Strathyoniformes, in which we find the family of ostriches, which are the largest of all living birds. The other is order Rheaformes, in which we find the family of rheas. Just looking at these two different birds, you can see that superficially they are similar. Both have long, powerful legs which enable them to run fast. They have long necks, and the shape of their beaks is much the same. They also like the same kind of habitat, which is wide, arid country. And even their diet is similar, because both ostriches and rheas eat insects, small reptiles, rodents, and an assortment of vegetable matter. Scientists, however, would tell you that in many respects these two families of bird are actually very different. The most obvious difference is to be seen in foot structure, because whereas the rhea has 3 toes, an ostrich is the only bird in the world with 2 toes. Another difference between these birds can be seen in their breeding behavior. Whereas it is the female ostrich that prepares the nest, usually a large depression in the sand, it is the male rhea that makes the nest for his harem of females. This is generally a very large nest and thinly lined with grass. Furthermore, whereas both male and female ostriches usually take it in turns to incubate the eggs, the male rhea refuses to have the females anywhere near him. From this somewhat strange domestic arrangement, we have, in complete contrast, a family of birds in which both male and female parent are mutually involved in the incubation and rearing of their offspring. This is the pigeon family, which belongs to the order Columbiformes, and in it we find the many species of pigeons and doves which are found all over the world. In spite of their great variety in size, colors, and habits, all members of this family are so distinctly pigeon in appearance that they're very easy to identify. This lovely bird, known as the New Guinea crown pigeon, is the very largest of all pigeon species. Yet there can be no mistaking the family to which it belongs. 2 other features which make pigeons unique are the way they drink and the way they feed their young. Unlike other birds that raise their heads to swallow after they've taken a sip of water, pigeons suck up the water the way we drink out of a straw, and they don't lift their heads afterwards. As regards feeding their young, which, by the way, are reared in a very simple nest consisting of a platform of sticks, parent pigeons feed their babies on a special substance known as pigeon's milk. This is secreted from the lining of the parent bird's crop. After about 5 days, the young birds are fed on regurgitated, partially digested food. Adult pigeons, depending on species, eat a large variety of food, ranging from seeds, grain and fruit, to insects, worms and grubs. Because they don't actually crack open seeds and grain, but swallow them whole, their beaks are rather soft. And now, everyone, it is over to you to explore the bird park, to really look at the birds, and to try and spot some of the interesting adaptations that are to be seen in all the different families. Have fun, but at the same time, never lose sight of the beauty and wonder of God's creation.